Hola, audiencia, y bienvenidos a Hoy Dimelo Cinema Club. I'm tonight's host, Jason Echoes. I am joined by my illustrious panel of co-hosts, Steve Des TV, Chris, Just JP, and El Dondino. So tonight we are reviewing a documentary. It was my choice, so that's why I am the host. And that documentary film is I Am Big Bird, the Caroll Spinney Story. We can just jump right into this one. Who wants to give their first impression of this doc?
I can go ahead and go first because mine's going to be short and quick.
Yeah, please.
I did not finish the movie, unfortunately, but what I was able to see was very intriguing. Primarily, I think one of the things that I didn't fully consider and I guess connected more with me because I went through a very bad accident roughly almost a decade ago is about the strain that they had to go through by having to put this Big Bird costume, like how much pain they had physically, like essentially like doing certain actions and pressing certain buttons. So that was very, in particular, something that I wasn't even thinking about or an audience wouldn't necessarily think about because they're more engaged in the entertainment of it. But people have to sacrifice a lot in that sense for it. And yeah, overall, what I was able to see was great. I just need to pay a little bit more attention and watch it. But yeah, that was my first impression.
Right on. Very cool. Chris, why don't you tell us your first impression?
So I thought it was a really sweet story. There's nothing too controversial in the movie that makes it like different. It was a very nice story. I grew up with Big Bird. I was a big fan as a kid. I definitely about 5 minutes in, or maybe even like 10 or 15, they hadn't done the costume function yet. And that definitely was bugging me out because I was like, they have to delve into this. And it took a little time before they got into that. But overall, I thought it was like a typical documentary, nothing too controversial. It was a sweet story. There was definitely some interesting things to learn about the guy's life. But in the end, later on, I would like to talk a little bit about his role as a family member with his parents and then also like as a parent. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I want to dive into that at some point too. Dino, why don't you tell us your first impression?
I enjoyed it. I don't know, man. I had the feels, man. I was like multiple. I normally don't, but I was like, I'm getting for club. Like throughout the thing, I was just like kind of like teary-eyed here and there. I was like, what is going on? Kind of like Steve said earlier, he wasn't really a Big Bird. It was like, same. Cookie Monster was my jam, like still is. Like Cookie Monster, like that I got. That I understood, you know, from the get-go. Cookies are good, you know.
You do. You love cookies till this day.
Yeah. I love cookies. C is for cookie. That's good enough for me. Yum, yum. But it was kind of like super interesting. Like, you know, I knew recently, maybe when the documentary was coming out, I figured out like, that's the guy inside of Big Bird. You know what I mean? With his kind of hippie bowl cut kind of hair and stuff like that. I was like, that's the guy. And like you know who Jim Henson, like the voices he did, and Frank Oz. So you don't really find out who all these other people behind the puppets and Muppets were. And yeah, it was super interesting to also find out that he did Groucho, right? Like that was I enjoyed Groucho and I guess and Cookie Monster because they were more a little gruffy or whatever, or just saw life like it actually is. That really it's all about cookies and, you know, life is trash. But I thought the movie was very sweet. And it did remind me of some of, yeah, it's like, imagine you got to practice having that hand up, just doing blocking. Because if you don't, like, just that alone, it's like, it would have been great if they ever did one of those MRI tests on his brain, on just like the idea of, you know, the hand motion, staring down on a little screen to know where to move, while also with your one finger you're doing the eyebrows, and then I would be interested if they were able to do something like that to figure out, like, you got to have this type of brain to be able to pull off Big Bird. So I enjoyed the documentary.
Very good, very good. JP, bless us with your first impression, your first thought.
Man, I'm ashamed that this movie did not delve into Oscar's homeless problems in this movie. So no, it's a really cutesy movie, like very like, it's crazy because there is moments in the films like you can't help but get like feels and stuff like that, like especially when it kind of goes into like his like past family experiences, like, you know, like with his father, his mom, and then him trying to raise a family of his own. That was pretty interesting. I really like those bits of the movie. I don't know, we might talk about it later, but there was a part of the movie that I was really surprised that they brought up, because I even told Caleb while we were watching, it's like, there is no way they're going to bring this up in the movie. And they did, but they didn't really delve into it. They touched upon it, and that was it. It was done. They touched it like, oh yeah, this happened, and that's it.
What part is that, JP?
The sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of it, right?
Right? No. Spoiler alert, it was the Challenger incident. Because I suppose there is no way they're going to bring up the Challenger thing, right? And they did! They did! But it was so quick and very like, oh, okay, like, all right, we're just going to touch on it and then never bring it up again or talk about how we felt about it. It just happened. Like, but overall, very touching, it's a cute movie. Like, you gotta be some like messed up person to have some sort of cold heart towards Sesame Street. Because there's also a documentary on Kevin Clash who did Elmo, and that one's like it hasn't aged that well just because he was let go of the show due to allegations that's what they are. They're allegations, so I'm not even gonna touch upon that. But yeah,
you're not gonna tickle them.
Movie. And this one's a cute movie. It's Sesame Street. It's Big Bird. It's adorable.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll go. Finally, I'll go last. So my first impression of this film, same kind of reaction. Very cute, very heartwarming. And I got to say, there was a lot that I learned in this thing, which made it very enjoyable for me. Like, there's a lot about Sesame Street and Big Bird that I just had no clue about. And some of the historical things, like, I didn't know about the Challenger, that Big Bird was supposed to be in that thing. Like, I didn't, you know, there's a ton of stuff that I didn't know in this thing. I will say that the movie, it doesn't really. So this is very much Caroll Spinney Story, the guy who created Big Bird. And because of that, you get Big Bird's story as well, because they're one and the same. But like, the things that kind of threw me for a loop a little bit was like the stuff that went on with his parents. And I thought the documentary did a really good job with that. The stuff that goes on with his significant other, I thought that they did a great job with that. That's the part that gave me the feels, like hearing about their story. I guess we'll touch on that a bit. So yeah, this movie gave me some feels. It does exactly what a good documentary is supposed to do. It enlightens you about a subject that you never even knew existed, right? And so everybody knows about Big Bird, but who has spent very much time thinking about who's inside Big Bird, making him come alive, right? Like, I've thought about it maybe once in my whole life. Like, who is Big Bird? And then I never thought about it again. So this was really cool. And I also love how like Jim Henson shows up throughout this thing, because he's obviously a very important part of making all this happen. So yeah, my first impression of it, I really did like this documentary. I will say this: I was expecting a little controversy, because we're so used to documentaries these days, like kind of pumping you with something like, "Dang, you didn't know that?" Like this, Caroll Spinney had a dark past, yo, but he didn't. This dude was clean cut as a whistle, and I really enjoyed them telling the story. I mean, and you know what? You don't even tell a story like this unless a guy like that is clean cut as a whistle, because it's Big Bird, it's Sesame Street, it's PBS Friends Network, you know? So you can't tell this story unless it's anything but clean, just like the Mr. Rogers documentary. It left me with those kind of vibes. So those are my first impressions of the film. So what I like to get into, let's jump like right from the beginning, and let's talk about like Caroll Spinney's upbringing. Let's start at his beginning. Let's talk about the relationship that he had with his family. You guys want to jump into that? I know Chris said he had something he wanted to mention.
Yeah, before he goes, I understand bringing that up, but like, boy, did they bring that up early in the film. Like, I thought they were gonna maybe cushion the beginning a little bit more with Big Bird, and then go into that, but they kind of just were like, we're gonna pull this Band-Aid out right now. And yeah, so that was my. I'll let Chris maybe take over from that. But
I feel like I know why they did that though.
Why do you think they did it?
Just from a storytelling perspective, it's interesting to have him have this, because it's such a clean cut story. It's interesting to have him have this challenge very early on in his life, and this thing that he had to deal with his entire life that's underneath the surface the entire time. This tumultuous relationship with his father, this this really bad feeling that he couldn't shake from his father his whole life. And then, near the end of his father's life, he found some sort of forgiveness in that. And he's like, well, even though his dad didn't actually apologize for any of the abuse, he said in his own way he feels like his dad did, and that was good enough for Caroll. For me, it wasn't good enough as an audience member. I'll just throw that out there. For me, it didn't feel good enough because I don't feel like his dad learned anything. But I remember, like, this is still Caroll's story, and he found forgiveness where he needed to find it for his own peace, which I thought was really powerful.
His wife said that he found forgiveness.
Yeah.
But to that, I will say, I understand why. Yeah, that gives the just the fact that they went into a good detail that he himself said, like the physical abuse. Like I could. Because this is a not rated documentary, and I'm like, kids might be watching this, so that's where I was thinking. I was like, are you showing your like 8-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid, like, and then it's just like, oh, okay, like.
Well, maybe. I mean, that was Caroll's 8-year-old life, and some kids watching this, that might be their life, and it might give them some inspiration or glimmer of hope. So maybe, yeah.
Okay, I see that.
So I read an article, like an interview with Caroll Spinney afterwards, because I wanted to delve more into it. Honestly, I was typing in, I don't know if you guys noticed, I believe there's a part where he's talking about his and his wife's relationship with their kids and how not just him, but she was often gone with him on these trips to like Australia and all. And that part kind of freaked me out because they would be like, we might be gone for 3 weeks. And then I was like, they're not delving into like, what were the kids doing? Who are they with?
What, the first wife, I would imagine. Because then they said, it seemed to me that
he had a first wife.
He did.
Yeah. That was a big thing as well with family that I thought Chris wanted to get into that. He had a first wife. The 3 kids were all from his first wife. And there were even Jim Henson, I think, spoke about it. Frank Oz definitely spoke about it, of like how they were married for like 10, 11 years. And like she didn't really back him with his art, with like anything, right? And so it was really, and that was a hard thing, like his divorce and stuff like that.
I don't ever remember them mentioning he had kids with that woman, though.
They did.
And then
I didn't know all 3 were with that woman because I was like, dude, how do you abandon your kids as both parents for 3 weeks? That's a long.
But I think he didn't have the custody. He must have not had, like, because it said we had them every single weekend, basically. So I took that as a fact that, and the fact that it was a really hard divorce, and I don't think they ever said the name of his first wife.
They didn't.
So they never mentioned the first wife. They never mentioned like where she ended up. It was just like, it was extremely hard, and we only had the kids during the weekend.
It felt like Caroll Spinney talked to the group and was like, you can say that it wasn't a good marriage, but don't say anything bad about her. But it seemed like the other people wanted to say stuff. Like, it did not seem like it was that they liked her very much.
So, because I don't know if then I guess you missed it, Jason, but then he talks about right after, during the divorce process or right after, like, he talks about opening window from the 9th floor and thinking about jumping out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
His one son was 1 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
but I thought that he had kids with her and he was also leaving them. I didn't realize that because I was just like, what? They didn't delve into that. And I was like, maybe he's an absent father because it was too much, like thinking about his own family. That changes things for me completely. Definitely, I don't know about you guys. I figured that the inspiration for Oscar the Grouch was his father. Right. But apparently it wasn't. Like I read again in the interview, it said like it wasn't because his thing was that people see the world in different ways. And he was trying to think of himself as how he saw the world. They kind of explained that in the movie. But I still thought like Oscar the Grouch totally inspired by his dad in some ways, but it wasn't the way. His dad was he was a watch maker, or worked in a factory where they made like the screws for little watches during the Great Depression. So he said part of the reason as he grew as an adult that he realized that he forgave his father was because it was during the Depression. His dad wasn't making any money. He got lost his job, like doing that. And it was really bad. So he's like, my dad took out all his angst in the world on me. You know, like that's what he said in this interview. I'm just so glad I read it because I typed in, how could Caroll Spinney leave his kids for 3 weeks? You know, you start Googling anything you think of. And that's where it led me to this interview. And I was able to read more about his relationship with his dad.
Well, and it talks about, and a veteran. I think I saw one of the pictures towards the end of his dad, I think had a veteran's cap. I would imagine he fought in World War II if he was around that time. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, he must have also been dealing with PTSD or whatever. But I kind of thought that about like him, like not being there for 3 weeks at a time. But if you saw early on, his wife ended up becoming his manager, which I was like, oh, that's a recipe for a disaster. But then I was like, oh no, that's really sweet. Because then she's going to be there alongside him the whole time. So every single trip. And they talk about early on, the guy that plays, is it Louis? He talks about how, like, towards the end, they kind of talk like the old school group of them, the OGs, that they used to do more traveling shows early on, right? Like, that was a big thing and so that makes sense. Like, oh yeah, Big Bird was just going everywhere to promote the show and do all these things. So I figured that, but yeah, it's not like, as kids, we have our icons, let's say like Robin Williams and other entertainers and artists that we also only know like from the screen and stuff like that. And then you hear like, hey, you kind of already know of like drug abuse and all that kind of stuff. But then their kids are kind of like, yeah, it's like the rest of the world had, you know, a dad, but we didn't have a dad, right? Like everyone, whether it's Robin Williams or other entertainers that were just beloved by, you know, basically the whole world, but their family was like, we weren't able to appreciate that or get any of that. Similar with Charlie Chaplin. Like I also just finished reading, I guess that was last summer. Whoa. One of his biographies. And yeah, the kids were kind of like, we don't know. We didn't have him as a dad. You know, we don't know what, you know, he was never around, or if he was around, he was always just on, or he was just really kind of aloof and just off by himself. So definitely I was expecting more of that from the kids. But the kids were like, yeah, maybe he wasn't there all the time, but whenever he was, it was just, he did everything he could for us. So.
But didn't it feel like the first son was going to like say something like really bitter at some point? It was like he's just on the edge of saying something like, yeah, dad was never there, so that was cool. Got to see him as Big Bird though, like every other kid. So that was cool knowing that was my dad because hey, it's his voice inside of the bird.
He did say something like that.
I think for some reason, I think that was just how he held himself, the son, because Michaela felt that the entire way. It's like she was like tell the cameraman how you really feel. Tell him the truth, god damn it.
Oh, that too.
So I think it was how he held himself. I'm gonna give him like the benefit of the doubt. It's like, no, he doesn't have any resentment.
It felt like it was coming though, didn't it?
But it did look like it was like something's gonna happen.
If any of them were gonna say it, I thought it was gonna be him. But so I don't. Maybe he already had his issues with the dad, and maybe got to the point. And I know then Caroll got sick, so I don't know. This came out in like 2014, so I don't know if he was already dealing with that kind of stuff. They were talking about like he was having kind of tendon issues or muscle stuff, and so I don't know if maybe he was starting to have a understudy kind of stuff. And if that was just kind of like he knew it was little by little, he was going to have to step away, or if it was kind of the illness that was coming. So I don't know if the son already was kind of like, he never threw.
Let's skip forward a little bit, and we can come back to revisit some of his personal life stuff. We'll talk about his wife still, because we should get into that, his current wife and what she meant to him. And but let's jump into like the puppetry aspect of it real quick. Let's something that I found pretty interesting, and I knew quite a bit about how the puppetry works on Sesame Street and those type of shows. But what I had never really considered is how the Big Bird situation works, because he's the only one that's not a Muppet, right? He's something else entirely. He's a whole body. So one thing that I found.
What is it? Sarpalago? What is the other guy?
Which I thought was kind of like, I'll admit, I was like, why are you guys hiding Snuffleupagus? Especially the one moment where they were saying like, oh, Big Bird and Oscar, they're both lonely Muppets. It's like, what about Snuffleupagus?
Well, there are two in there. There are two in there.
Well, you know who I forgot about was that Big Bird had a dog. Remember that dog who was running with him in the Great Wall in China?
Barkley. His name was Barkley.
When I saw that dog.
Barkley. What a great name for a dog.
Well, one thing I was like, wait, Big Bird and Oscar were never together. Like my whole mind was just
I thought that too, Dino. But they were. They just filmed it. They definitely talked. They had conversations. 1,000%.
I was just like, were they never on screen together?
Like Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and he, like, the scenes.
No, they were absolutely on camera together. They just edited it to make it. But
now I can't unhear that. I can't unhear Big Bird when I hear Oscar now.
Right.
Yeah. Me too. Same.
Anyway, go on, Jason. You're talking about the mechanics.
So what I wanted to talk to you guys about is how much about the puppetry did you know? And also, let's talk about how, because his puppet is way up here, he's holding his arm in the air his whole life, right? Yeah. So that's a whole thing. I bet he's got all kind of like shoulder and elbow and injuries. But also, the fact that he worked the mouth so much, and because his arm was elevated, the tendons would heat up. I've never heard that from a puppet person before. But if this guy is doing it on like the highest level on Earth, right?
Dude, do you think you could go like this for an hour? I don't know if I could do this for an hour.
Did you do it for 40 years, Chris?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just for 1 hour. 1 hour straight, like the whole time.
But they showed how much the weight was. Like they showed the one guy like lifting an iron, and he's
5 pounds.
This iron, is 2 pounds or 3 pounds, and now imagine like holding it up. I mean,
the head's 5 pounds. It's a 5-pound head.
Dude, he's got a script in front of him. He's got that little camera thing, all that shit. Like, it's so hard to take over for him.
Yeah.
It's like, I can do this.
Yeah, the counterbalance thing blew my mind. I
didn't know about the counterbalance with the hands either.
I thought there would be like a sneaking of like, oh, he's not going to speak. He's going to bring it down and like maybe play with the other one. But no, like the counterbalance ropey stuff, I was like, that's genius.
Yeah.
And that's from like the late 60s.
I'll say what I thought was insane was I knew of how the puppet was made, because I remember it was in some sort of museum where they show the same diagram in the movie. But I would have thought, like, oh, that's when they first started. Because
the Jim Henson experience or exhibit, it's really good. If anyone or Muppets, if anyone, it's usually a touring one, but it's about Jim Henson and the Muppets, and of course, Sesame Street.
I'm pretty sure that's where I saw it, but I was under the assumption, oh, that's how they started the puppet. So when it went to modern day, I was assuming, oh, we're gonna see how they operated today. Like there's probably like a monitor inside, a smartphone or whatever. And we've seen it in other Henson puppets where you got people working animatronics on behind the scenes doing some of the extra stuff. But no, it's still Caroll in the suit doing all this shit. It's like, no, upgrade that stupid suit.
I loved it. I loved it because I had the opposite reaction than you, JP. I was thinking like, when I saw it, I was like, and they're still doing it the same way today because technology hasn't changed that much to change puppets. They were the technology that changed puppets. They were.
Dude, how much do you love the fact that all the words were written? Like all his words were written in his handwriting. I was like, oh, that's so awesome. Like, and he's reading it inside the costume. Like that guy, there's no way to take over. Apparently the guy did a really good job taking over, but man, I was like, that's such a big thing. Like, you couldn't even imagine what you're taking over. Like, you'd be like, I can do this. No, man, that is like a whole that part of your brain. Like, that's so crazy. That's why
I was the guy. His name was Matthew, I believe, right? Who's taking over?
Mark, yeah, he was great.
Mark Vogel, because Vogel in German, I guess, is bird.
Mark Vogel, right. It wasn't Matt Vogel. It was Mark Vogel.
It might be Matt. It might be
Matt.
One of them. Yeah. It might be Matt.
Well, so Vogel taking over for Big Bird, he's the apprentice. It's like, it's a weird situation, right? Because this dude is now in like a lifetime commitment sort of situation. Because I was like, shouldn't you have like 2 or 3 Big Bird apprentices? Like, what if something happens to Matt? Like, you can't assume that everybody's going to be in this thing for 40 years. Like, Caroll, it is him. So for him to do this role for 40 years, he invented it. It's a part of his actual soul. Yeah. So he wants to do it till he can't do it anymore, he said. Until I physically can't do it, I'm going to do it.
That's what happened. It's funny with Vogel, with the apprentice. I was like, yeah, so it was kind of getting to the point of like, maybe he needs a little help. And so like Matt Vogel came in as an apprentice and 15 years later.
Yeah, that he just kept going.
15 years. I'm like, was he doing other Muppets while waiting? Or was he literally just like,
sitting on set all day?
Yeah.
And it's the extra commitment he doesn't want anymore. Like now that they have to do green screen stuff, he's like, I don't want those extra hours. You can have those. Well, that's new. He wasn't doing green screen in the 70s and 80s.
No.
He's like, man, I'm not really doing extra work and getting the same salary. That's all you, player.
But it's true. I mean, I think at that point it's like, all right, what can I cut down on? And green screen can be really freaking tedious, especially maybe like if you're just there just by yourself doing green screen, even though that he was kind of a lone dog or whatever. But yeah, I can see that him being
so let's
like,
talk about that a little bit, Dino. Let's talk about the idea that he never mentions how lonely it is in the suit. Only the apprentice did.
He kind of alluded to it. I will say for the physicality, I think what helped him was his military background, that he joined the Air Force, right? Again, that's a family thing. Like he, kept getting into fights with the dad, and it just got to a point where he's like, all right, I'm out. Like a fight. And again, it makes sense that you said Great Depression, because the dad was like, I handed you the car with half a tank and you gave it back with a quarter, right? Like a quarter of a tank of gasoline in like the 50s or something like that, right? To me, that is mind blowing. But yeah, if you're lived through the Great Depression and all that, and like you want to make sure you use as least things as possible. So I think his military background had a lot to do with it. I don't know what he did in the Air Force. I would have liked to have heard a little bit more of that. But in the military, you got to be in those positions and you got to be very strict in how you're doing stuff. I had a little, we had the mandatory military service in Paraguay. I mean, it's just basically doing boot camp, but you learn how to, like just holding the gun, doing the different things, like different, they're going to make you do different things where it's like, you just gotta, hold the rifle up and like not move, hold that, like you can learn how to do it. And he just was able to, the discipline that he had to do that is mind boggling for sure. But,
yeah, I think maybe because he was an actor, he sort of had a little bit more idea of like how to use his body and stuff like that. Whereas everybody else is really just a puppeteer, I would imagine, because they're not even using their whole bodies, right? But he was an actor, so that's a great segue into let's talk about Caroll Spinney's early career.
Oh well, sorry, I totally hijacked your loneliness that we didn't really jump into.
Oh, we did. Did anybody else want to talk about the idea of this guy being lonely in that costume perhaps for the next 40 years? Or do you think because like Matt or Mark or Vogel, we'll just call him Vogel, do you think like he's looking forward to the next 25 years? Like, oh no, it's going to be so lonely in there because I know what to expect. Whereas Spinney perhaps saw the whole thing as just one adventure. He's blazing the trail. He doesn't know what's next.
It's his creation. Yeah. I think they referred to a lot of the loneliness too when he was like living in Spanish Harlem and he was thinking of quitting. Like, dude, how big of a difference would that show be without Big Bird and without Oscar? Like, those are two, like, Big Bird is probably, I mean, I love Bert and Ernie, don't get me wrong, but I think Big Bird is the most iconic. Obviously, Elmo is the whole thing now, but the most iconic is probably Big Bird, right? So when you think about that situation he was talking, that's what I wanted him, like, dude, it would have been really interesting to see what a life as an artist living in Spanish Harlem at that time. He told us like there was trash on the streets and things like that, but he really didn't delve into like what was the creative culture there. Was he living in a place with artists? What was going on at the time? They touched on like a little civil rights and stuff. They showed those couple screenshots of like horrific images, but that was kind of it. They didn't really touch in the world and how he fit into it. Clearly he was a hippie, right? We agree?
Yeah, I think so.
I think everyone in that Muppet shop was a hippie.
It's probably a hippie, yeah. I mean, Jim Henson is like the epitome of a hippie. So, but I think that loneliness delved out of like he almost killed himself. I mean, he taught that guy, when you're watching him at the end, you wouldn't picture that guy having that kind of, I don't know, inner turmoil. And man, he really did.
That's that artist, right? Life, the artist life, when you get to a certain point and it's just kind of,
he had no confidence. I mean, the guy had zero confidence, and everyone said they noticed it and that he messed up a lot when he was brand new. And he was like, I cannot do this.
I do want to say he didn't create the character of Big Bird. He embodied and made, like they said, like he created the soul of Big Bird.
Okay.
And yeah, because he even credits the costumer that came up with. Yeah. So he embodied.
He very much was sort of just going through the motions at first.
Yeah.
He was. It's a weird thing, right? It's a weird like artist journey, because here's a guy who clearly this is what he's destined to do. He knows he's destined to do it. He's prepared every part of his being for this journey of being Big Bird for the rest of his life, foreseeable life. And he's in the moment and he has no confidence about it because he's just going through what I think a puppet person master is supposed to do, opposed to being an artist in the moment, right? Like, you need to start creating and feeling and embracing what this thing really is. And I thought that was interesting, because when he said that he was going to give up, that reminded me of every artist's tale I've ever heard, of the artist who achieves the great thing on the eve of them giving up.
Well, not only that. Oh, shit. We didn't even talk about, like, right, Henson seeing him where he was also very technical savvy. Like, it seems like as a little kid. But, like, he's like, I had a projector and I created all these things. and had practiced it, and then night of they are shining this freaking light, and he can't see his own projections, and just gets up and starts doing shadow puppetry, and just like that little bit of like story again. It's and like Henson was looking for people that could solve stuff on the go, right? Like imagine how many times you were like about to do a show or something and it had to get canceled because the system didn't work or whatever, or the times where it's like this doesn't work. It's like let's just do it, right? Let's go ahead and do it. And it's just sometimes the being there and taking that moment, right? So it is many times, I guess, in his life, like he could have not had gone to like Sesame Street or not continued, right? There are a lot of moments where he could have just decided, like,
he did the little bit of extra, you know. Steve Harvey talks about that a little bit, where he says that if you want to be average in life, just do what everybody else does. That's it. That's all you got to do is the bare minimum to be average. He goes, if you want to be ordinary, you do just a little bit better than average, just a little bit to be ordinary. But if you want to be extraordinary, you have to consider the extra. Do a little bit extra than everybody else. And it seems like maybe Caroll did that. He was always like, I'm going to give it one last little effort. Even though he failed at his performance at the Puppet Festival, he said, you know what? I'm just going to choke myself and pull my hair out from behind this projector as my last little bit of the show within the show of the show, right? He always like, I'm not going to let it die here. I'm going to use whatever creativity I have as I die. And maybe that's what Henson was looking for, man. Like you said, Henson's like, I need guys who are going to live this thing. And Caroll Spinney is definitely that guy.
He is, definitely. The most nostalgic thing of the entire movie for me was not seeing the old images as much as in that scene you were talking about, the puppetry scene where the lights go out or the light's too bright. They actually did those drawings. Only reason I know this is because I have a 3.5-year-old and I have read recently some of those old school Sesame Street books. If she was not sleeping right now, I'd run upstairs and grab one. But when you open them up, the drawings are amazing, but they have a very specific style. And they were smart enough to show those scenes and create those animations in the same exact old school style. That was my favorite part. It was awesome.
That's really cool. I love that.
It was really cool. That was the most nostalgic thing because I've been reading those to my kid. And dude, one of the books, I don't know if you guys noticed, there's a scene where Big Bird is blue and he's jumping out of a cage in the back. Do you guys remember that? There were like these brothers called the Sleaze Brothers, and they kidnap Big Bird, turn him blue, and make him like a blue bird in their traveling circus.
Yep. Yeah. Follow that bird.
I have that book. I have the book where they have that story, and I read it to my daughter, and the whole time I'm like, oh man, am I messing my kid up? Like they're kidnapping this blue bird and painting him blue. But it is what it is, right? I grew up with it. So, and then dude, you always open up those books because I don't have them from when I was a kid. I buy them at places. And usually there's some kind of like, hey, Timmy, thought you would love this, Aunt Jenny. And I'm like, oh man, that so reminds me of like that time, like your aunt would buy you a book and give it to you and write a little note in the front. Nostalgia was killer in this.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I really like the animation in this movie, actually. I feel like every documentary should do animation for the reenactments if they don't have like file footage. You remember the reenactment shows that used to come on TV show, like America's Most Wanted, and they would reenact the crime? Why don't they just do that with animation? Because then you can do anything.
Sure. I think it's become more and more of a style. I mean, clearly Sesame, this one had the reason to do the drawings like it was, but I think more and more there's more animation recreation. Just to go, because you were talking about the books, and I was just in Paraguay, and we were going through our old house that we still have, that we basically just like, before we moved to the U.S., just packed everything in and came. And so we're looking for documents and stuff, and found this little old, what's the records, the phonograph? Is that what it's called? Like a plastic one, like yay big, and it had like 4 plastic like records of Sesame Street, and like I was like, this can't work anymore. But it wasn't battery operated. It's one of that you wind and you put it, and it still worked. I mean, it was really like beep, 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 beep. But I was like, it's working.
Did you bring it home? I hope you have it.
I left. I know it's in really bad condition. I was like, ooh, this is my $1 million ticket on eBay. But I'm like, the stickers all peeled off. But I was just like, oh man, what sweet sounds. Anyway, that's a little nostalgia.
Think of the nostalgia we think of, and now I watch Elmo every once in a while with my kid, and I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, it used to be so good. It used to be so good. It was like so heartfelt. That part where they show where Mr. Hooper dies, and it's like teaching kids. There's a Mr. Rogers episode where he talks about birth, and they show a cat having kittens, and he talks about what that is, and he does it in a way that's so meaningful to little kids and doesn't make it weird in any way. That is like beautiful. And same thing about death there, man. Like Big Bird made death like a beautiful thing that like they were honest. They were using the word dead, and he died. They weren't like, he's gone. You know, it was different. So to me, that those were the lessons when we were little that made us go like, this is an amazing show, like made us really into it.
So Mr. Rogers wasn't like, you know what a cat penis looks like?
No, not at all. It was more like the birthing process. And literally there were like baby cats or kittens.
I get it. We haven't even talked about Bozo anyway. Okay, so
well, yeah, let's talk about Bozo, man. Let's talk about all his early career. One thing I don't remember, though, when he went to the Puppet Festival, was he doing Bozo the Clown at that point of his life, or did he have another job?
No, well, he was never Bozo the Clown, by the way.
I said when he was doing Bozo the Clown.
Yeah, the ancillary.
It was after. It was in between. He talked about that he wasn't satisfied with, or the wife mentioned that he didn't seem.
It was brain candy.
Yeah, that's what he said. I think he used that word.
That he was just doing kind of like these little side characters, and they weren't really all puppets. It was more just like him in costumes and outfits, and he just wanted to explore more. Like he said, experimental theater. I was like, okay, experimental theater. I was like, that's such a hippie 60s.
I mean, theater. But really, if you think about it, that's kind of what Bozo was in a weird way. I mean, it was a nationally syndicated
puppet.
Huh?
For the puppet show for the festival that he went to, he called.
No, I know that's what you mean, but I mean also for Bozo, it is kind of experimental in a weird way because he said they basically had a production meeting like the day of the show, and they would just kind of like make it up as they went.
Yeah.
And to think that's how that clown Bozo show went with all those kids in the crowd going crazy, I bet you could make a whole movie about how an episode of Bozo is made just from the background.
It just starts with them getting stoned. It definitely starts with the people behind it getting as stoned.
Can you imagine dropping your children off in the 1950s and 60s to go watch Bozo the Clown in Chicago at the WGN network, and the cast members are back there getting stoned before they entertain your children with balloon animals and water balloons for the next pies in the face.
Yeah.
I'm sure those are the deleted scenes from UHF. I'm pretty sure that's what those were.
Or check out Death to Snoochie.
Oh my goodness.
I do feel there's a shot just because of kids like looking at that of Oscar the Grouch is talking, and he's next to the stairway or staircase outside and there's a little kid, they're sitting on the steps. And I feel like this little kid is just kind of like staring over the side of the steps like, is that a guy? Because early on in the Muppets, I had the couple of the DVD box sets, but in like the first or second episode of the Muppets show, they actually, at the very end, when credits roll, they like pull the camera up, and it shows all the bottom of the performers with the puppets and stuff. And pretty quickly on, Jim Henson and them kind of realized like, no, let's not show the guy behind the curtain, right? Like, so they really try to work on not showing the puppeteers, especially to kids and all that. So that's definitely something of talking about, you know, with Bozo and all that, like breaking the fourth wall type thing. My friend's nephew, they had Barney at his birthday party when he was a kid, so years ago, and I guess ran into Barney without the head on and just freaked the fuck up because Barney didn't beard, right? Yeah, it was like a dismembered Barney, you know. So
I love that though. I love that Caroll started off in that place, and like there's a lot of guys who maybe had Caroll's like potential or dreams, but they got real satisfied with just being a clown on TV for 7 years, and then probably never did anything else. I mean, I don't know these guys' stories. I'm just saying, like, it's just really interesting because you know Caroll was put on this earth for that, right? Like, that's what he's here for. He knows it. The documentary knows it. We know it. Like, the universe knows it. God knows it. That's why Caroll's here, to give us Big Bird, to give Earth Big Bird, right? Every kid on Earth knows Big Bird. It's just funny to watch a guy that important to culture, really, if you think about it. Big Bird's like on the cover of everything. He's so important to like American culture, pop culture, world culture. That's what makes this documentary so interesting to me, because you see where that brain comes from and where like opportunity meets invention, meets preparation, meets luck, meets, you know what I mean? Like all these perfect little atoms form together to create this perfect moment with Jim Henson, to know this guy and to happen to be at this festival, to having a network, and I mean, not a network, but, you know, a show, a deal, the structured deal to create characters. And it's kind of, I mean, it's not kind of amazing. It's really amazing. It's really amazing.
Lightning in a bottle, right? Like
lightning in a bottle. I could have just said that.
Of all these, look at the foreign guy with the American, with the English sayings. I don't always make sense, but the times that I do, like lightning in a bottle.
Like lightning in a bottle.
Picks up those idioms.
I know. I'm just going to keep saying lightning in a bottle.
Another thing that happened that I wanted to talk about, JP brought it up, and I think it's important to talk about, is the Challenger. The Challenger exploded. Now, I will say in the documentary, in my opinion, now I want to get you guys' opinion too, I really liked the way they handled it in the documentary, because it made me take a moment to think for myself, like, why did they do that? And the answer I came up with was, it's like, they know that they were on this, well, you know, Caroll was going to be on this ship, right? Okay, I just had this notion too. How devastating would it have been to hear as a kid that Big Bird died?
I have something to say, dude. When I was born in 1978, and when that happened, they literally rolled a television on one of those carts into our classroom, and we watched the Challenger. I was in like first grade, I guess, maybe second grade, and it was a big deal. Kristen McAuliffe, we actually had bought like postcards of like her and like the Challenger itself, and everyone got these little packets. It was amazing. And that happened, and I was like, dude, if Big Bird had been in there.
Yeah.
Like, wait, you missed a huge part of the story. How did you guys react when you saw the Challenger blow up?
I didn't know that part of it. I didn't know Big Bird was supposed to be on that. I was shocked. I had no idea. JP, you knew that?
Yeah, I knew.
I just wanted to know how you felt as children watching the space shuttle explode on TV.
With a teacher.
Chris,
there was a teacher.
Yeah.
No, I know. How old were you, Chris? You said you saw it explode, right? In front of you.
You were in first grade.
At school. I'm guessing, I was born in 78, so I think it was like 84, 85. So I was like.
So you were pretty young, but do you remember your reaction?
I remember everyone getting upset, and I feel like they turned it off really quickly. I don't remember it being like something that was discussed, and I found out later on what actually happened. But I can only imagine if Big Bird was in there, like how much different that would, because that would be the end. Like, let's be honest, at that point, it would take a long time to find somebody to do that. They wouldn't have like a backup guy ready to go.
Literally and figuratively, right? Yep. Big Bird would have had to have gone. And it would be all any comedian ever had to talk about. Okay, but I will say this, because the way they did it, I also feel like we should do it too. The reason that they didn't mention anything about it, like, thank God that wasn't us on this, because there's people who lost relatives on that thing, right? Right. So just like in honor of them, it's almost better to not even talk about it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, to say how lucky we are, and that was another bit of, like, obviously it was the director's intentions, who directed that moment, but it also felt like they didn't really have much to say. And I love that they were husband and wife, but they were like linked and they were that close and they had those same feelings about that same situation. They were like almost the same person. They had the same feelings about the little girl that they acted with and the Big Bird Goes to China. I really love their relationship as well. I want to talk to you guys about that. But that Challenger thing was wild, man. Do you have a take on it, JP?
Oh yeah, no, I was. Well, I already said it was weird that they brought it up and because one of the things that they mentioned was that they actually saw it in the studio. They stopped production so they could see the launch, and they don't talk about anything other than that. Like the moment just happening, they don't really delve into like their reaction afterwards or like
I agree with Jason. I thought it was very nicely done because they talk about it, and I think they built the tension to that. Because I had no idea. I knew it was a teacher, right? I feel like the idea that I think they had to mention, not because of like, oh my God, he got saved, but just how big of a celebrity, like how big the height. By that point, if it's 84, it's like all these kids that grew up watching him are already in their teens or young adults and already have kids, babies or young kids that are growing up watching Sesame Street as well. So like for NASA to be like, oh, we're losing viewers again, right? Like, geez, no one's interested in space. Well, look, I would have almost have liked to see more of that, but when it first came up, I was like, what year? Oh no, he was supposed to be in the Challenger, although they both ended up blowing up, right? I mean, it's bizarre, but I was just thinking like, what year is this? The year was he supposed to be there instead?
Couldn't believe it. I was so shocked.
So I think it was well done just to show how big of a celebrity Big Bird was, not him. That's what I thought was also great. Like, he didn't like kind of flaunt it or anything. Like, it seemed like he was completely fine being behind the veil. But
isn't it also insane how much Big Bird saved his life? Yeah, Big Bird was too big to get into the aircraft. That's the only reason he didn't go.
No. It was storage, which I've heard that's a huge thing because the weight has to be exact. And so it really comes down to what can you take up with you? Like, they have so the way I understood it, it wasn't that they couldn't get it in there. It was just the actual weight and storage of that was just not feasible just for, I guess, however
for space travel, sure.
Yeah.
Plus, they must be worried that the other astronauts would come over and start plucking feathers off of the costume so they could take, like, how about that story?
That was pretty. I could imagine that being devastating. I felt like I was in the room and had to see that.
Yeah.
You mean the college kid thing?
Mm-hmm. No, they were like ROTC kids, right?
ROTC. Yeah. Oh man, I hope they whoop them so bad. Like, they're like, you guys.
How did nobody put it on? I thought he was going to say that the kid was walking through wherever they were.
Well, I'm sure they were playing with
it. Maybe they did. They just didn't catch him doing it.
But
they probably got in that thing like, man, it smells like puke.
How do you do this? Like, I'm not even sure.
They jumped in. They jumped into the costume. Like, man, it smells like puke and fart in this thing.
Yeah.
What is it? Macabre? Is that how you say it? My mind, like, mainly when we were talking here, I was just thinking like, man, Big Bird there and it blew up, it would just be like feathers. Like I was just like this horrible image of like it exploding and you just be like feathers like just coming down. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
it's all bad
they did
news.
find pieces of uniform, like while searching the debris. So I wouldn't doubt.
Ugh.
Who knows? Maybe they would have found pieces of the actual costume.
Yeah, that's pretty wild though. Because I can see now, like, oh yeah, they took Shatner up there, you know, like just on one of those.
Yeah,
you know,
40
whatever.
years later.
Yeah. I know. But just like, yeah, now it would be easier of just like, oh yeah, let's just stuff it in one of those just right above, you know.
Dude, it would have been a true Hollywood story. The story of Caroll Spinney, a true Hollywood.
Yeah.
Now, like that was 10 years after, right? So it was like they started in like the 70s. So imagine like mid 80s, this happens and he dies. Well, he's not as iconic then. Now he's gone on 40 more years and become like Big Bird. You know, like the one we know. That's crazy if he would have died there. Because nobody else would have been able to do it at the time quickly.
Yeah, no, that would have been it for Big Bird. They just would have been off the show.
To do the
But
voice.
you know, I remember watching that Big Bird episode where Big Bird deals with death. I remember watching that as a kid. Like when I was watching it, and I was like, wait a minute. I didn't even know what they were getting into right away. I was like, I seen this episode in real time when it happened. And that was kind of cool. I'm like, yeah, I definitely remember Big Bird having to deal with death as a little kid, as a little, it's me being a little kid.
Yeah, and dude, for me, Luis has always been my favorite human on the show. Like that's always been my favorite. His name's Emilio something, I believe, but he's been my favorite. Bob always kind of reminded me of Martin Short, I think.
Yeah, me too. And my dentist, Dr. Nickerman.
See, like that's 100%.
And so, like, Bob, I had some issues with because he looked exactly like Dr. Nickerman.
Shout out to Dr. Nickerman if you're watching.
Shout out to Dr. Nickerman if you're watching. Yeah, I feel like my favorite was probably Gordon.
I like Gordon.
I think I liked Gordon, and I sort of had a little bit of a crush on what was her name, Shelley?
She was the funniest person that talked, I think, in the documentary. If we're talking about the same person.
Was that her name?
She was laughing. I loved her. I don't know what her first name was, but she was great.
Was she the one talking about the microphone picking up the the radio?
No, not her. Radio? Not her. The Puerto Rican lady. The Puerto Rican lady who lived on Sesame Street.
Her name, Lucia?
Yeah.
Maybe it's Lucia. That story.
She looked an awful lot like my aunt. So that me growing up, I almost thought that was my aunt in the show.
That's so funny. So that story about the mic, so there were mishaps with Big Bird, because that story about the microphone picking up the airline people talking dirty, and they're like, oh God, it's about the X-rated show, and it's coming out of Big Bird's microphone. Everybody's like, what is happening? But then, what was the second thing that made them leave?
Bob stabbed the Big Bird.
Right through his throat. Wait, a kid in the audience yelled, did Bob just stab Big Bird in the neck? And they said, all right, show's over, folks. Good night.
Yeah, done.
They're like, no, we are not going against this crowd of people after Bob just stabbed Big Bird in the neck. We're not answering those questions. We're not dealing with it. We're out. Good night.
It's great.
I love it.
Yeah, they're like,
they got telephone sex and a stabbing.
Yeah.
They're just like, we're done. Like, there's no need to continue.
Love that show.
The show did not go on. How funny is that? Caroll got through everything except for that. For that, he couldn't recover. He's like, that's it. I'm done for today, folks. We'll try again tomorrow.
It's amazing him roller skating with those big ass feet.
Yeah.
Basically rocks, like jumping on jumping on a trampoline in that outfit and walking. That's why I think I'm almost certain like he became so big, other than his personality, but he was the like Sesame character, the Muppet character that you could see full. It wasn't like Kermit that like, oh, we're gonna show him ride a bike, so we're gonna do a kind of camera trick practical thing, and it looks like it's Kermit. But you didn't see, you couldn't see the full Kermit all at once. But him as Big Bird, he could go places and not have to be hiding behind something like, you know, Kermit and all these other characters. So I'm pretty sure that's why he became so big and so popular. It's just like, it's your imaginary friend. Like, that is, you know, not connected to a human being. Imagine that, like, we're how old, and most of us didn't actually know how Big Bird was. You know, we know puppets. We grew up with puppets, knowing how marionettes work, knowing how Muppets work. But it's like, I know it's a combination of that for Big Bird, but I thought someone else was maybe controlling the eyes, you know, kind of like with a remote or something like
really
that.
Tall guy with a thin neck. Like, that's as a kid, I'm sure that's what I thought.
I thought Big Bird was real, yo. I never considered it any other way. I'm not even kidding right now.
I mean, why would you? As a kid, like, just
no, as a full-grown man.
Yeah. Oh, did we just Santa Claus you?
I think we did.
Kind of.
Wait, what?
I don't know anything about Big Bird. I always assumed he was Big Bird. I'm not even kidding. I told you guys at the intro, I never really considered who was in him. Maybe once in life, or like, who's that? And then I'm like, nah, that's really Big Bird.
I think Carol would agree.
Big Bird.
I mean, you know what? But that's a master at his craft. That's another thing. I love these documentaries that have come out in the last decade or so that talks about masters mastering their craft, from the guy who's like the ironsmith dude to the sushi guy.
Sushi was like, awesome. I love that movie.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I dream of sushi. I had very almost his relationship to Vogel reminded me of sushi. Like, I'm the apprentice, been the apprentice for 15 years, and you know, and that's kind of like,
you still can't make an egg, you know, like, correctly.
Yeah, the Hiro dreams of sushi, and it's like, very similar.
Yeah, man, I love that. I love those type of stories where we get to see like masters at work, you know, and to watch their trajectory, because these are people that, like, we recognize them as genius, and then you look at their trajectory, and it's like, I would say there's a theme. I would say the theme in all of these guys' journeys is that they never gave up. Like, whatever hit them, they just found a way to kind of sideswipe it or move, or the universe interjected on their behalf, or whatever kind of anything you want to believe. But there was always something that kept them on this track.
It was their work ethic, man. Anytime their creativity and then it was like the work ethic took over. I agree.
Yeah.
And then you finding a partner also like that. Like, the story of just like this girl with, you know, X length of hair, then like so-and-so later, it's like, you know, all this pretty long. And then she's like, yeah, it's the third time you've asked me. And he's kind of like, oh, I just, you know, in his mind, he's like, oh, I guess I've been rejected. I'll just go up to this other girl. I wanted to know if she also didn't realize that he was Big Bird. You know, like, I'm like, you know, maybe like that was maybe going to be the funny story. Like, yeah, nobody knew who Big Bird was, even unless you were in the stage type of thing.
Or maybe you'd be like, I don't want to go out with Big Bird. Like, who wants to go out with Big Bird? Right? Like, I don't want to go out with the guy with that voice. And, you know, like, I'll think of that all the time, you know?
No, I mean,
I dug it. Let's talk. Let's go into, is there anything that we should hit before final thoughts about this thing?
We didn't really get any talk about the groupies.
Well, I will say this. No, we didn't talk about the groupies. I will say this, just because we were touching on that already. I'll go back just a smidget, just rewind just a smidget. I did like the meet cute between him and his wife, because that's very much what the director did there. He's like, I'm going to throw in a meet cute because it's the love of his life, and she plays a really intricate role in all of this. You know, she manages Big Bird, yo, like, that's a job. You know, and she's like loving and supporting this man in a way that makes him feel at peace enough to do this thing, right? So she's like super supportive. She was in from like day one when she decided to be in. But that's why I like that story, because without that story, you don't really get to know who she is. You know, the fact that like she turned this guy down 3 times and she said, "Thanks for being persistent." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I love that. I thought that was super cute. That
Because he was
super
kind
great.
of like, oh, of course she's taken. But it could have been like, hey, yeah, she maybe had a boyfriend at the time, or just like, oh, I have another engagement. Like she could have been like, oh man, I have, you know, I gotta go. So, you know, she could have just been like, oh no, I'm busy, not like I'm, you know, dating someone else. Just like I'm gonna go play Scrabble with grandma, or you know, whatever people did in the 70s.
Wash my hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, serendipity is all throughout this film. Like things just constantly keep happening for him that are.
So how did Jim Henson pass? Do we know that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I looked it up. I thought it was cancer. I thought it was cancer for the longest time. Pneumonia. He died of pneumonia.
Okay.
That I guess
at 53, I think they said, right? 53.
Yeah.
What a shame.
That's right, because it seemed like it was way more out of the blue, and I was like, well, I thought he had cancer. But apparently he got sick, had, you know, pneumonia and like a bacterial infection. And at that time, you know, it was really weird that you can die from pneumonia. And it was kind of just like, you know, it's like if he would have just gone to the hospital like 10 hours earlier or something like that, he would have probably been saved.
Bernie Mac died of pneumonia. That wasn't that long ago.
Who did?
That's right. Yeah,
Bernie Mac.
Bernie Mac.
Oh, yeah. Dude, how about the fact that his voice is basically, when you're watching him talk, you're like, that's Kermit. Like, he's Kermit.
Oh, yeah. Jim Henson? Yeah.
Did anybody notice there was a guy in the movie that was, like, helping, whose name was Kermit? And I was like, is that where you got Kermit from? They kept talking about this guy who was, like, assisting named Kermit. And his name appeared. I was like, is that Kermit?
I thought they were going to bring it up, too, the name. So
yeah, how did they not
his name just happened to be Kermit.
How many other people? I know someone named Kermit.
He made Kermit for a Lipton tea commercial back in the day.
If you guys want some extra credit homework on Canopy, when this came up, one of the suggestions was a documentary. It was a 57-minute documentary called Jim Henson. And I looked at it, but there's no trailer. And I was like, oh, man, maybe I'll watch this in a little bit. I do want to know more about Jim Henson. I mean, that dude, he could still very well be like with us right now. What would Jim Henson have done? You know what I mean? Like, what else was he going to invent or create or
animation too? Yeah,
animate, or you know, what more characters would we have had? What more shows?
Mouse? I'm just kidding.
I know. I was like, more than what his son came up with, and wouldn't have sold out to Disney probably. Because
everyone might have sold out to Disney earlier.
Right, but maybe with more control, because the son just kind of. The whole thing is the son created Rizzo the Rat, I think, or someone like that.
And then it went HBO, you know?
Yeah. But, Henson, man, like, those are people kind of like, what's the guy from Apple and stuff like that. Just people that had to be in the right place at the right time, and just like their level of creativity is just on a whole nother, like, visionaries basically. And you know, people don't always like picture someone like, oh, it's bit puppets for kids. What is that? It's like, no, that's visionary, man. Like, how many different languages Sesame Street has been dubbed into? Like, it's insane. Like, everyone at some point has seen.
I once heard Jim Rohn or one of those guys tell a story where I think it's Zig Ziglar, and he's telling this story about his about poor Mrs. Henson. He goes, the people, the other women in the neighborhood who used to go, oh, poor Mrs. Henson, you know, her son is in the garage all day playing with dolls. Like, how old is he now? He's 23 years old and he's still at home playing with dolls. Poor Mrs. Henson. You know what I mean? I also love how much.
He brought that up a little bit also, of how he was bullied, and he was, you know, called more than just gay because he was still playing with dolls. You know, and his name is Caroll, and he's playing with puppets, but everyone's calling it dolls. And he's like, oh, I hope one day they say, I used to be classmates with so and so, you know.
He was really nice about that because I would imagine I would have been way more petty. I've been calling dudes out by name.
Me too. In the movie, 100%. I would have been a dick.
I'm like, he said Big Bird was a piece of shit. Just so you guys know.
So
that was his
before I knew he died, I was like, I'm gonna email Caroll Spinney. Not that he'd check his email, but dude, there's a song by Ben Folds. Do you guys know who that is?
Yeah.
Pianist. So he has a song called it's about like getting back at all the people. He's writing a song talking about all the people he grew up with that bullied him his whole life, and like it's called like, I forget what it's called. It's like One Angry Dwarf and 4,000 People or something like that. And it's all about that. And I was like, Caroll Spinney needs to hear this song, man. It's all about getting rich and being like, you know what, screw you now, man. Like, here I am. I made it, and you guys used to pick on me my entire life. And I felt for that dude so much in that moment. And dude, like, how do parents name their kids something? Like, how do you not think that out? I don't understand it.
It could be in that time period, right? Or
dude, John Wayne's name was Marion. His real life name is Marion. That's crazy.
Really?
Who?
John Wayne. His real life name is not John Wayne. It's Marion something.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well,
so you got to be
Marion. Is his last name Wayne?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that was a
probably not.
Yeah, I don't think so. But that really hit me too, man. I thought that was an interesting part of the documentary. Like, here's this person who would mocked all the time. When you say like poor Mrs. Henson's kid, like Caroll Spinney was the same exact way. Maybe that's why.
Man, that makes a lot of sense about John Wayne. Now that you mention it,
yeah,
he was a fake actor. He was a terrible fake actor with a fake name, representing one side of like the worst part of humanity for decades on film.
Mm-hmm.
And like glorified. He's like the worst. John Wayne is the worst.
Although one of my favorite bits from a movie is from the Birdcage when trying to get Nathan Lane to walk more manly, and I was like, walk like John Wayne, and he does like this weird ass strut, and and he's like, no good, and Robin Williams like, no, it's good. I just never realized John Wayne walked like that. My only like favorite like John Wayne thing is a bit of in the Birdcage.
That's funny. Yeah, the Birdcage was great. Wait, so what were we talking about?
John Wayne.
Just
in relation to the Caroll Spinney story.
That Caroll was picked on.
Oh yeah, him being picked on. Yeah, man. Like I liked all of that. I liked all those parts of the documentary, to be honest with you, because I really liked the parts where we got to know what motivated Caroll and what made Caroll and the things that were important in his life and memorable. That was, I mean, because a lot of the stuff I knew about Big Bird, I knew Big Bird went to China. I knew he did a movie called, the whatever, Find That Bird. I owned it probably on VHS.
Me too.
But I didn't know much about Caroll, man. And those are the parts of the documentary really that just really warmed me up, like on so many different levels. Like, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see like this guy's life.
I'm just going to keep that for my final thought.
I kind of want to know the rest of like the Sesame Street people's lives too now, if I'm being honest.
It would be interesting.
Like, my favorite growing up was Grover, specifically Super Grover and Oscar the Grouch.
Well, you kind of know Oscar the Grouch, so you can check that out.
That was great too. Did you guys know that he was Oscar the Grouch?
No, I didn't know.
How did we not talk about that?
Like, that was nuts. I can't unhear it now.
Yeah.
Because
and how he came up with the voice.
Henson and Frank Oz. So like we know like Frank Oz did Yoda, Miss Piggy, and Grover.
Yeah.
And they all kind of sound like a younger Yoda. But
how he came up with the voice was great. The taxi driver. And
that was good.
Yeah, that was super cool. And you know what's kind of funny? When you look back on it, Oscar the Grouch and Big Bird are the two most complete characters on Sesame Street. They're two most complete. Everybody else is just kind of like out there a little bit. These two are very specific about what they are and what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
They don't waver in
I don't
opinion
know.
or idea or philosophy. They are who they are. And they represent
Well,
a certain part of Sesame Street.
I
They're
don't
the
know if I agree with that.
spectrums. You said you don't agree?
No, although they did try to make Cookie Monster into a salad guy.
He's not gonna let Cookie
Cookie's
go.
That's because you're about the Cookie Monster aspect of it. But I'm telling you, Caroll Spinney was the bookends for Sesame Street.
I know, for sure. I'm just mad they tried to make Cookie Monster eat more salads, and he's like, cookies are sometimes food, you know. Not
I think I saw
time.
that one. Someone might have sent that to me on YouTube, actually.
Yeah, like Big Bird is like wonder. Oscar is like when you're miserable. Grover's your fear, right? Cookie is when you're just out of control. Like all the characters embody some like part of your personality, of everyone's personality, right? Yeah. Sometimes you're miserable, like Oscar, and that's why
they've added new Muppets, right? Like a
that have less dimension. I feel like they're not
an ADHD one, like a Muppet that has ADHD.
Right. Is it Elmo? That would be.
Well, listen, adding Elmo was a brilliant move too, and I do like that was probably the worst part for me.
Oh
to see that, to see how that affected Caroll, the fact that like Elmo kind of stole the show, like, and he recognized it as an artist. Like, yeah, it's better for the show, but it's kind of weird.
You see, the people around him the people around him were talking about him. A lot of it was his wife, and then the other people that had worked on the show. But he's very reserved in talk, so he didn't bring that shit up about Elmo. The other people were kind of like, he recognized, he this, he that type of thing, right?
And the audience
so it was
changed.
They were all hyping him and also kind of like defending. It shows a lot about how he is and like his person, that everyone's like, he won't say it, but we'll go up to bat for him, type of thing.
Yeah,
like,
everyone
we all knew what happened.
Everyone in the dock would beat up folks for him. Like that's how it.
Like with his ex-wife.
I want to see Elmo's perspective on that. It was like, Big Bird who?
Right, like I never heard of him, baby.
Elmo don't know who Big Bird is.
That was a money move.
Oh, is that the big old yellow thing on my show?
Even the humans seem more bitter about Elmo than Caroll.
Because it does. It changes changed the dynamic of what Sesame Street. Sesame Street was almost the Muppets before Elmo, but Elmo's like 3 years old, so now it toddlers love Sesame Street. It was the smartest thing they could have ever done.
It's good money. For sure.
It keeps kids on the show for an extra 2 or 3 years.
Right. Well, because Sesame Street was almost more like starting age. Well, I mean, you could have them as baby, but it was really kids that are starting to learn the language. So I think around 3 to 5 years old, right? And so, you have Elmo, and it's just like, oh, yeah, this is a toddler can easily follow this kind of thing. I remember
that it used to appeal to 5-year-olds, they said in the documentary, right? And then when Elmo joined, like the demographic shifted to 2 to 3-year-olds.
Well, they said like 5 to 8-year-olds, like even an
5 to 8. Yeah, that seems like who would love Big Bird.
Right.
Yeah.
But then like now you're getting from 2 to 8.
Well, I don't know. Well, I would imagine, unless
I don't even know if you're getting 8 anymore, though.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not.
And there's so much stuff. I mean, you had. Speaking, Blue's Clues, you have so much other competition.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why Elmo was like, well, there's Barney, there's all these other things that have kind of tried to take over Big Bird, right? The Blue Dog and, Blue's Clues and all these things. So they're like, screw it. Let's get the little kid, let's get even the toddler. In 96, when we were in Alabama while my mom was working, I think it was 96, maybe it was 94, and we were just visiting. And the Elmo dolls were the ones that were like
Tickle Me Elmo,
and like the whole craze.
Yeah.
The whole craze of like Walmart and all that, and just pandemonium trying to get the freaking Elmo doll.
Yeah. I remember that. That's crazy. Like, yeah, they were selling wild amounts of merchandise. I did think it was kind of interesting how they said you couldn't walk past a kid in the 80s who didn't have a Big Bird doll. And I don't really remember them.
Oh,
I don't really remember them.
I was born early 90s, and
I remember seeing them, but
Big Bird dolls for sure. Like, I think, but then, then you got
almost
the as well.
In the 90s, mid 90s, I feel it became Garfield on the windows of cars. The freaking Garfield on the
windows,
like,
and
that, yeah,
and the Barney dolls as well. Did no one have
Sometimes from the back of trucks, you would have Bart Simpson mooning people.
Or like Calvin and Hobbes urinating on whatever they did.
On a Chevy sign, on a Ford sign.
Dude, last week I was driving behind a car and they had Buzz and Woody like hanging off the rear windshield wiper. Like,
yeah,
it was awesome.
yeah.
I love it.
Down in Paraguay, they like Bart Simpson's decals on cars like big is still huge, and like a combination of Homer and Bender for like liquor stores and bar. Like you just have Homer and Bender from Futurama, and they're like that's all over Paraguay. I was just seeing like, well, yeah, the two get them young, right? Hey, these cartoons they drink, so they're fun.
Beer.
How about you? Yeah. How about you, kid? Drink. Cool beans, senor. Anything else, Mr. Eccles?
So let's go into final thoughts about this thing. JP, lead us away, my guy.
I would have much rather have seen the Elmo movie, but no, I'm just kidding.
There is an Elmo movie, by the way.
There is. There's how many? That's another Sesame Street movie. Did Elmo had his own movie, right? Like cinema movie, not a documentary.
Yeah, no, he's had plenty of them. Dozens, probably.
Oh well, that's Elmo's a big star. It's cool, but no, it's a really nice film. It's cute. During Big Bird's eulogy, like that was for sure. That's where the heartstrings for me is like, oh god, because you could hear him like cracking underneath, the suit, because that's his workspace. The other puppeteers they got backstage and other people with them, but Caroll is by himself inside that suit. That's his workstation, and I could only imagine, like, I want to see how that was like in there, like being so exposed but not at the same time. So that scene on its own, like,
are you saying you want to get into the Big Bird costume?
Oh, like just to see the emotion there, especially during that moment. Being
I see what you're saying.
Like being that vulnerable and whatnot. But
are you talking specifically about the woman telling him the story?
Oh no! This is when he was singing the Kermit song.
Yeah, right.
It ain't easy being green.
Yeah,
got you. Yeah, right.
That was
crazy.
Man.
Yeah, like it's because of course you imagine Kermit, like that's Kermit's song, but at that moment Kermit has lost his voice, and it's just so sad. And you could hear him.
Thanked Kermit. Do you remember you thanked him?
Yeah, and it's devastating for that scene on its own.
Did they make the bird's eyes sad for that, or did he just tilt his head a certain way for the sad effect?
That was him embodying the character.
Yeah.
He did not need to do any manipulation at all.
He controlled the eyes, but that's also his voice acting, right? Being able to make that kind of.
Oh, he controlled the eyes. That's right.
Yeah, with one finger, he controls the eyebrows. It's
I forgot about that. That was him making Big Bird sad.
Yeah, the pinky. That much controls and that he's able to like look in his little thing and know like and be able to tell like how to do the eyes to give that emotion is just.
And then he's watching himself on a monitor the whole time. Watching himself on a monitor and moving in reverse. I don't know if you guys have ever tried it before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I used to know someone who worked at the Jim Henson workshop for a little bit. She did a workshop there, and I played around with it, with the monitor in the reverse, it's hard.
Just right now, when we're moving on screen, it's the opposite of where we're actually moving.
That's like now you have now we have the option of mirror, right? You know, so now there's that option, but before there wasn't. Well, Jason, you're also freezing, by the way, so it doesn't work that well.
I think it's crazy. Like, dude, imagine he brought it up. I think at the funeral, I'm going to do a song as Big Bird. Like, some people must be like, this could go really well or come off really bad. And he did an amazing job, but that could have gone wrong.
So it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Imagine Frank Oz, like, he was just like, yeah, I haven't revisited that. Like, it just shows, like, how connected these people were, right? That there are certain moments where it's like, you want to talk about and you can't talk about it still after all these years, right?
That's what Frank Oz said. He said, I haven't revisited that.
Yeah, he's like, I can't revisit that. I kind of like, he's completely almost blocked it out. He was just like, I haven't revisited it. I just can't.
He did not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. What year was that Jim Henson passed away?
Late 80s, I want to say.
Yeah, maybe early 90s. I don't know.
I'll check. I'll take a look right now.
Yeah, like I feel like I had maybe seen him sing that song before or seen that special. But
1990.
1990.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I probably saw that when it debuted on TV because there's only so much stuff on back in the day. But so I probably saw it when that came on. And I watched it because it looked familiar, but I probably did not associate who Jim Henson actually was and that he was the voice of Kermit because him wearing that green bow tie or whatever, like on his suit or whatever he was wearing.
Oh, man.
I didn't even put that together till I was watching. I was like, oh, man, like this happening in real time. This is crazy. It's like the death of Kermit Frog, bro. Kermit D. Frog. Yeah. Kermit D. Frog.
Because I don't know if you guys were thinking that maybe there was like a yellowish screen on his body that he could kind of look out to, kind of like with Barney and like the Teletubbies or whatever. Like clearly there's like a mesh that they look out. It's like, no, bro is freaking looking at a tiny screen.
I always thought there had to be some way of looking out. I never knew that he was looking at. Yeah.
Freaking monitor.
Yeah.
It's rough, man. And all of this, by the way, has been brought to you by JP's Final Thought.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, JP.
Did you want to finish up your final thought, JP?
No, like literally that scene on its own, like I think it's worth the watch, to be honest. Like there's so many other great moments too, getting to know, like, because like the whole family dynamic thing, like I could tell Kayla and I kind of had like the same reaction to some of the people being interviewed, where it's like, oh, well, I had a great dad, so I can't imagine hating my father, as opposed to people who unfortunately didn't have that luxury. But it's great to see how he was able to get out of that and, have the strength to forgive and let go. And no, it's a great watch, very heartfelt, very nice. Yeah, A+. Even though I brought up the whole Challenger thing, that was the only part that I didn't really like, but it's whatever.
Cool. Chris, how about your final thought?
I think I've done probably 10 to 15 movies with you guys now, and I think the biggest testament I can say is I don't feel like we talked about the movie as much as we normally do. This was all more about like the person and then our own personal feelings. And also, if you look at our runtime, is the longest thing we've talked about. When we were walking into this, I was like, I feel like this is going to be short. There's not going to be enough to talk about. We're going to reminisce a little bit and then we'll won't know where to go. And man, we just keep going on and on with this. So the biggest testament I would say is I do remember one other thing from the interview is that it said something about him doing a ton of orchestra. Like he must have done like these appearances with an orchestra, and he did that for 8 years. where he would get on stage and do these things. And he said, like, that was the part where I had to give it up at some point because my arm just couldn't take it. And I was like, that just pushes towards this man's dedication. And to me, that's the thing. Like, this movie for me is, after talking about it for so long, is really about the person more than the movie. And I think that's kind of inspirational, especially, again, like how long we've been talking about it.
Wow, that's a really great point. Dino, final thought.
It's interesting just to piggyback on the length that we've talked about it, and just, again, the importance, clearly, that still has, even though, I don't have kids, so I don't know the last time I actually sat down and watched the Sesame Street, but the idea that all this also from an 1.5 hour documentary, and this 2014 that it came out, so a little before, all those documentaries started hitting streamers. But I'm glad, like, there were a few things that I didn't want to hear more about, like how it happened, but kind of like, Chris went and read up on it, or I enjoy that. Not like more and more now on HBO and other streamers, they're having like 4-part series, kind of like bio series, and so much has ended up being fluff in the middle, right? Even though JP didn't kind of like the whole Challenger thing, I understand his reasons for it, but it's not that it was just there for fluff, right? There was nothing like filling the feathers and stuff like that. It was like everything that was in this had like a purpose and like really helped move the story along, which is of Caroll Spinney. Like, everything added to it instead of just like, and now we have this kind of in-between moment just to have it. Even though there are a few things I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about it. But hey, it was succinct and to the point, and it hit a bunch of things, and it had callbacks, like the girls, the Chinese girl, the woman who then they, reunited, and even that they didn't show. It's like they were so, with his wife and stuff, like they so emotive. So they just, them talking was enough. Like, they were so good at just talking and expressing their emotions that you didn't need all this extra. Like they got so emotional talking about the little girl the first time around, and then them meeting and kind of tearing up and all that. It's like, yeah, nowadays it would be like, kind of like the Office thing where it goes, clearly I have the blinds and all that. Yeah, so we met and that was extremely sad, and I started crying, and, and I'm going to stare right into the camera, and then you're going to show the clip again and then come back to me. No, it was nice. I hope these docuseries, kind of bio documentaries, we don't have to do 4-hour things on them and just rehash the same thing over and over. So I enjoyed it, and I would recommend this to a whole slew of people. And there's nostalgia, there's people interested in puppetry, all that. So I give it 2 Big Bird thumbs up.
Well, thanks, Dino. Steve, I don't want to leave you out. Did you want to do a final thought at all? Here he comes. Ta-da!
Final thought is, I gotta watch the film.
Okay, that is a great final thought. And I'm going to second that final thought within my final thought. So my final thought. Yeah. So my final thought is very similar to all of you guys. I feel like you guys all like really nailed it. One part that I will say that we didn't talk about, my favorite part of the film is the film, or the part where they are working with the girl over in Asia, over in China. And they're like, the whole cast and crew all sort of like fell in love with each other, and they fell in love with this little girl. And I can imagine that. I can imagine them like protecting this child for however long the shoot is. And they had a small skeleton crew, they said. There wasn't like very many people. And, Frank Oz is like carrying, his own equipment at times, you know what I mean? Because it's bare bones in China. And them all just being a little circus family. and they're not like over there famous or anything like that. Nobody knows who these people are over in China. So it's like they're probably able just to work freely like they did when they were much younger and much more able to, you know, it was probably a really wonderful experience. I bet everybody over there who went on that trip will probably tell you it's one of the best times of their whole lives, because you just get that feeling from the emotion that the central characters give when they talk about that trip and that experience and what that meant, like culturally as well. So that's my favorite part of the movie. To me, that tells sort of like who everything is about this documentary. That's the documentary in a microcosm to me in like a small pill form. I would recommend this thing. I would recommend it to people who watch Sesame Street. If you've seen Sesame Street, if you loved Big Bird growing up, and you want to know anything about the guy who was in it and his life, it's an incredible story. I think you would really dig it. I would also recommend this to anyone who is a performer, because as a performer, you watch Caroll Spinney work. He's a master. That dude's a full-on master at his craft. You know, he's a wonderful performer because he's so good with his body that he's controlling another entity's body. He's super dope and brilliant. And anyone who loves the Muppets or Jim Henson or any of that, you know, that world, any puppetry at all, this is a flick for you, man. It's probably mandatory viewing in the puppet world. Ladies, comment below if you're a puppet master or if you work with puppets or you're a puppeteer or you're a marionette artist. Let us know. What do you think about this movie if you haven't already seen it? And if you haven't, then go. That is basically my final thought for this thing, man. And I would watch it again. And I probably actually will watch it again. Small, simple documentary. And I actually have a question for you, Steve. I was wondering, what do you got for us next week?
Next week, we're watching RRR again. No, I'm kidding.
Again and again and again. Like we're just a bunch of bros. We just keep picking RRR.
I don't know why you asked me, because it's not my turn. It is Chris' turn.
What?
So this time I went with a documentary also, because we haven't done very many since I've been on. And I went with something that I've seen but never talked about with anyone else. So I've seen the movie. It's definitely interesting and has like a lot of emotions, but I've never actually met anybody else that has watched it. So we're going to be watching Dear Zachary. Has anybody seen that?
I've heard about this. So
it's called A Letter. I wrote it down because I couldn't remember. It's called A Letter to a Son About His Father, but it's called Dear Zachary. So it's a documentary also. And I just am very interested to see what other people think about it because no one I know has ever seen it.
This should be fun to talk about.
I don't think it's crazy long either. I think it's like an hour and a half.
There you go for Dear Zachary for next week. So for JP, El Dondino, Chris, Jason Echoes, and me for a little bit, Steve the TV. We'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.